So today I wanted to really spend some time with you on Columbus, Gaza, Western Empire, and I'm just trying to Western Empire and the development that we are seeing today in the Red Sea. And I really frame it as Columbus, Gaza, and Western Empire. And somebody might ask, what are the connections, if there is any, between these three distinctive themes? And I will definitely make these connections because the world that we are experiencing and what we are talking about today really has a long, long history to it. So I'm going to go immediately and share with you this map. This is actually around the period of the 15th century, and it shows the transformation of sea trade routes, also the age of, quote, discovery. That brings us into the age of colonization, Western colonization, and in particular, seeing the emergence from both Portugal and Spain, and then later on England, the Dutch, the French, the Belgium, that gets us into the modern world that we are in today. So again, Columbus was trying to discover a new route, a different route to India, and the Native Americans that discovered that he was lost in his way to India. But this ushers in this transformation. In particular, we're talking about Vasco da Gama going around the Cape of Good Hope, 1497, 1498. This is again after the expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Spain in 1492 and another expulsion of the Moriscos in 1609. Why is this important? Because again, this is the world that we are part of today, and we continue to live the consequences of this change of sea routes, change of trade, colonization, and the continued dominance of the extractive power of Western power, extractive of natural resources, and visiting death and destruction upon the global south. Multiple genocides throughout Africa, genocides in the Americas, genocides in Asia. If we think also in relations to the map that we saw before, to this map, this is literally the map of the sea trade routes and the movement of resources, products, and so on from across the world. So if we looked at the map before and look at this map, we could realize that the world that we have been part of, the world that we inherited today, is still dominated by shipping products, shipping raw material, and movement of products from the global south to the consumers or to the consumption centers in the global north. And that is very important and significant. Remind you, most of the products in the world today that move from one place to the other is shipped predominantly by sea and then on land by trains and trucks. Shipping is very, very limited. You just cannot move the type of products and the consumer products, the cars, the materials that we use with airplanes. So it's still a world dominated by sea routes, shipping, and then trains and trucks. Now, as we know that the closure or the crisis that has emerged with Israel's attack on Gaza and the Houthis threatening of the shipping in the Red Sea have caused the rerouting and companies deciding to reroute outside of this region and making sure that they are no longer using the Bab el-Mandeb in Yemen, which goes into the Suez Canal. Now, the difference again For example, if you have a shipping coming out of Mumbai or in India, you're talking about 7,200 miles, give or take, depending on the region. Or if it's from Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, into the Red Sea and then to the Mediterranean, compared to almost 12,300 or more miles to ship into London and to Europe. So literally it adds cost, it adds time, and resources. So there is a impact, and that's why the United States and now the establishment of the so-called Operation Prosperity Guardian, with the United Kingdom, Bahrain, Canada, France, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Seychelles, and Spain joining the effort as a way to try to maintain these sea route. But this is a story that is far older than the current crisis. You could actually go out to the Roman Empire when it actually was governing and controlled Egypt, attempting to have a campaign on Yemen to control Yemen. So this has been a focal point of trade movement of products and in essence part of Western domination. Now when we talk about oil in particular, the choke points of oil, again, Strait of Hormuz is the critical part of how many billions of barrels are present in the Middle East, and the choke points around the Strait of Hormuz, and then Bab el-Mandeb, Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Gibraltar. All right, so this again, these are the choke points. That's why the United States militarily and the Western powers militarily with NATO dominate and attempt to have maximum military forces, with the United States right now having between 3 to 4 fleets, either two inside the Mediterranean. One is really outside the Persian Gulf and sometimes inside the Persian Gulf, with the major operations from Diego Garcia. So this is again part of Western empire, an attempt to maintain this flow of natural resources and trade. Now, if we think of the colonization of Africa, Africa after the 1884 Paris Conference that divvied up Africa, Africa again is still the richest continent in the world with massive resources that are really at the center of Western interest and Western domination till today, right? Almost every product we think about, for people who use diamond, gold, copper, even lithium, between Africa and Latin America, or Latin and South America, cocoa, not to mention oil and natural gas, phosphate. You talk about Africa is the motherlode of resources, and it's still the motherlode of extractive power of Western domination. Don't let them, fool you that they're going there to try to help the Africans arrive at peace and prosperity. There is no peace or prosperity in Africa as long as Western power continue to dominate. And I know there's a discussions today about that China is coming into Africa, and we need to make sure that China does not come to Africa. This is actually coming from the United States and Western Europe, basically saying this is our loot and we're not going to allow anybody else to actually pillage and steal. We've been at it for 500 years and we know exactly what we're looting and we are pillaging, and we don't want China. So again, there are some people that think they're sophisticated by pointing to China, threat of China, as if it is a threat to Africa, and that it will prevent the prosperity of Africa. Let's just be very clear. The French have pillaged and continue to pillage Africa. The British have made their money and continue to make their money out of Africa. The Dutch, the Belgium, and you name it, and then also the United States. So that's part of the dynamic where Africa's resources are directed at the raw material and extractive resources, and with it also the work with corrupted elite, post-colonial elite that facilitate and continue to facilitate the pillaging of their region. Now, if the same thing is in Asia, in terms of the various colonial powers that continue to dominate this region, And even though that some parts of Asia have emerged out of the colonial era, still the domination of the colonial period is still there as it relates to resources. Now, this is the British Empire, where the British Empire, because it's very significant and very important. We talk about Columbus, even though that Columbus is not British, but don't excuse people. The British, when they're thinking about Palestine, and they issued the Balfour Declaration, and they created the current dispossession of the Palestinians, they were thinking from a colonial term. The British had India. They also had the coast of the Arabian coast of Yemen, Bahrain, region, Oman, and also Egypt, Sudan, all the way down south to what we call today South Africa in that corner. So again, that corridor was a British corridor. The British were thinking about Palestine to create a buffer state to protect the Suez Canal, especially after it was opened in 1869. Even if we go before that, Napoleon's campaign on Egypt was an attempt to disrupt the British trade and British power by trying to sit in Egypt. And then he also took a campaign up in Palestine, defeated by the city of Akka or Accra in the north. But he also had a campaign, and then the British came and destroyed the French fleet right outside of Alexandria. And from that point on, the British became the power behind the Egyptian thrones during the period of Muhammad Ali and his successors. And then 1882, the British took control of Egypt. So the British were thinking about moving all the loot, all the things that they have robbed and stole from India, and then not to mention also the other parts, Australia and so on, but in particular India, $45 trillion worth of loot and pillaging and resources that they took out of India, and it had to pass through the Bab el-Mandeb, and that's why the whole campaign to try to colonize Yemen, which they did in terms of the what came is South Yemen, and dominated this, and then the Red Sea through the Suez Canal in order to get the products, materials, and all of the resources to Great Britain at the time, and also militarily to facilitate the movement of troops, because colonization embedded or at the foundation of colonization is violence, and violence is rooted on a military industrial complex and military movement of military personnel and so on. So that picture, in essence, the United States became the inheritor or the successor to the British Empire. So the British Empire and the French Empire coming into an end, you could say, is beginning to come to an end during World War I, but definitely by World War II, the United States became the custodian of the Western imperial project, and with it, domination and control of sea routes and domination of regions that prior to that was dominated by the British, and with it also taking and protecting and extending the Zionist project in Palestine. And from that moment on, again, the continuation of the process, even though that the United States became far more closer in its support of Israel post-1967 war, again, the 1960s, and Israel became a colonial, became an important utilitarian state in the Cold War, and so on. But it's trade routes and the world's biggest choke points that we're looking at, again, the Strait of Hormuz, Suez Canal, Panama Canal, are this, and Suez Canal is very, very important with the Bab el-Mandeb in the south. In this sense, if we think about the map of the Strait of Hormuz, which for anyone that deals with oil and natural gas, this is the hub of the global economy. And much of the US and NATO war games centers on what to do and what to respond to if, on the one hand, Iran or this region comes into a major conflict, and what are the consequences. So this is, if we want to think about the hub of the modern global economy, and the modern power dynamics in around the globe, financial, political, strategic, um, uh, energy-wise. This is the hub, and then also added to it Bab el-Mandeb, because much of the shipment, at least that comes out from this region, aside from the pipelines, comes throughout from Bab el-Mandeb to the Suez Canal. As we know, the discussions about normalization, the so-called Abraham Accords, the closeness between United Arab Emirates, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, all is centered around trying to create a new bridge or a new way to transfer oil, natural gas from this region, where Israel becomes the hub to open to the Mediterranean. Now, this has been in existence since the British Empire, because the British were the first to discover oil in Iran, and then in the 1930s in much of the Gulf area, the Arabian Peninsula, and after the discovery of oil in this region, this became the most critical, indispensable region in the global world and the global economy, with the idea of actually a pipeline that comes out directly, whether it's from Iraq or this region, to come out to the Mediterranean, and it will be directly into Europe, which would shorten the time period. It's also might be less, quote, insecure, and as such, this new dynamics of the normalization with Israel becomes almost the key or the gate toward security of oil shipments on, but all at the expense both of the Palestinians on the one hand, but also at the expense of the Arab world simultaneously, because in this sense, Israel become the not only the military hegemonic power that is empowered by the Western power, but also becomes the major economic hegemon, controlling and dominating the economy and discourses from the region. As a subtext to it, also Egypt, in relations to the Suez Canal, will be with a major loser or the major strategic loser in this dynamic, especially if the contemplated new canal that is being proposed on the other side of the Red Sea, thus making the Suez Canal less significant and less critical relative to Egypt. Egypt depends on the revenue of the Suez Canal. And it's the proposed or the new idea of this new alternative canal will have both going up and down simultaneously, where the Suez Canal has only one way, that the traffic goes up and then it has to stop and then the traffic down. So there is all these dynamics that are being played. And this dynamic will result in literally weakening Egypt, which is the hub, the strategic hub of the Arab world. The largest Arab population, is the largest state in terms of significant. Historically, it's also the cultural center for the Arab world for the longest period of time, the intellectual center of the Arab world, and so on. So, in essence, the neutralization or weakening Egypt will have a strategic impact for Israel. It's been weakened considerably with the debt and so on. But this new normalization, this new economic planning that is underway, would actually puts Egypt at even a much more disadvantaged position vis-a-vis Israel, but also in the region. And that's why we see the hub. The hub has been shifted. Iraq has been completely destroyed, and we don't know how long it will take for Iraq to re-emerge as a major player and state. Syria is in shambles. Libya is literally it's almost a non-functioning state. It's a collapsed state as a result of Western intervention. Sudan is in the middle of a conflict. So the hub of the Arab and also Muslim world have shifted to the Persian Gulf area, where you actually have only resources but no population and no strategic depth in terms of long historical trajectory vis-a-vis the region. So that's very important to think in those terms, and why the current war on Gaza, on the Palestinians, is not only a sideshow. It actually goes to the heart and the central Western imperial project, dating back into centuries, and continue to actually reflect its way and puts its imprint in the contemporary period. And that's how we need to understand the dynamic. So this is again the Suez Canal and the pathway. Close to 14%, possibly as up to 16% of the global trade passes through the Suez Canal, and the presence of Israel in there as the hegemonic power. Some would say it's a fixed military base for the Western world. But interestingly, we could see that Israel is unable to sustain itself without the heavy support from not only the United States, but all of the Western powers to maintain it afloat politically, militarily in particular. And that gets us to understand that it is Palestine and the Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and Palestinians in general have been actually not only struggling against Israel's Zionism and the call for freedom, but it's actually tugging and confronting the totality of the Western imperial project, all going all the way back to the British and the French with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, with the Balfour Declaration, and continued into the East-West confrontation of the Cold War, and now into the global economy that is still dominated by raw material, dominated by oil, dominated by natural gas, and dominated by maintaining the global South, where the Arab and Muslim world is central to it, and dominated the global South in terms of Africa as the source for raw material and the economic empowerment of the global North. Europe still till today lacks the fundamental resources, and as such, it needs and continues to access, dominate, pillage, extract resources in global South, while simultaneously working with post-colonial elite that were nurtured, you could say suckled on colonization, and are there to maintain the interest of colonial power, colonial powers in the post-colonial world. And we're seeing that the war on Gaza have exposed and literally laid bare this dynamic of the Western world actually aiding and abetting and being complicit in the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the Palestinians. But let me remind you, the Western world have been persistently engaging in genocide. Again, the genocides in Africa, the genocides in the New World, the genocide in India, the genocide in Indochina, and so on. So in this sense, the complicity is normative rather than exceptional. What is exceptional is the fact that we have a global mobilization at this point that is demanding and calling for a different future horizon and demanding freedom for the Palestinians. That is the exceptional. So this is another way to visualize the shipping and the movement of products through trade that continues to really heavily depend on the global South. Let me repeat again, the global South, Africa, Asia, the heartland of the Arab world, that's where, and also parts of South America, that's where most, if not the overwhelming resources of the global world are present. And it is dominated, continued to be dominated by the Western Imperial project, beginning 500 plus years with the Columbus attempt to bypass the heartland of the Muslim world at this point, and continued in the colonizations in the 18th, 19th century, continued into the 20th century, and the emergence of the contemporary power of Western powers led by the United States to try to maintain the status quo at the expense of the Palestinians. So I wanted for us to really recognize what is taking place. And as the United States is launching this Operation Prosperity Guardian, this prosperity guardian was still part of the project that we could date back to Columbus, attempting to really bypass and create a different economic underpinnings in the world. And as this was done, we are living the final consequences of it in the contemporary period. So I wanted for us to recognize that this map of the distant past is the map of today, with some minor modification in terms of the region, and it's still centering, even though that the center of the world have shifted to the United States as being the representative of what the Western Empire, in terms of resources, dominations, and so on, and literally acting as the police force across the world for resources. Again, it's very, very important. The resource extractive power is at the core, and then movement of these products across both to the United States, which is the main and primary consumer market for whatever finished products are done, and then secondly to Western Europe. So we're dealing with the war in Gaza is directly connected. So that's why I said Columbus, Gaza, and Western Empire are not separated, but it's part of a continuum or a historical trajectory. It might change some of the main players and some of the main characters in terms of Portugal, Spain, Belgium, the Dutch, Germans, and then coming into the United States is still rooted in this trajectory. So as we are calling for freedom, justice for the Palestinians, we need to be cognizant that it is not a very narrow consideration, but rather a much longer array that we need to be aware of and be cognizant of. So thank you, and hopefully I'll give another installment in the future.